Good afternoon, and welcome to today's class on the analytical stage of formation with Laura Berquist. Laura, will you please begin with a prayer?
Yes, thank you, Sue. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Mother of divine grace,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Okay, so we will get started here. We're going to talk about grades 6 through 9. I'm going to start with an overview of our entire program, and I am going to talk a little bit about how thinking takes place in the human person. And I mention this now at the beginning just because if you are listening to these family trainings and you have already listened to the earlier grade levels, K through 2nd and 3rd through 5th, the beginning of this will be the same with slight variations. So, if you're listening to them all today, then you might want to move forward in the slides and the recording to where we start talking about the text. If, on the other hand, you're listening to this first, or it's been a while since you were listening to the others, then I recommend you listen to the whole thing. But anyway, I just want you to know that we do start out with the same thing for the sake of those who are going to listen only to this stage of formation. So here we go. What we want to do in this module is identify the different stages of formation and understand the focus of this stage, in particular the analytical stage. We're going to review the books used at this level and identify ways to adjust the curriculum. Now, this last point, using case studies to apply practical applications, that really has to do with when we meet, so we offer an hour-long question and answer period for the different stages of formation, one a month, and I think those are published on the public website, so you can look there, or you can chat with the office, they can tell you. But anyway, there we will talk about specific case studies, and there'll be some opportunity for questions. So that's what that has to do with. Now, the reason that I start out this module with an overview of the program is because it's important to have an overview of anything you are undertaking. You have to know the beginning and the end in order to have a real understanding of the process and the goals. You can't move toward the end that you want to achieve if you don't know what it is, right? So the steps that you're taking, today and the next day and the day after that are ordered to achieving some particular end. But if you don't know what that end is, then you can't really take those steps with confidence or, being sure about where you put your feet, right? So I want you to have an overview of what we are doing in Mother of Divine Grace School. What are the ends we're trying to achieve? What is this education ordered to? And once you know that, you'll understand better why we have the students do what we do today. Education is always freeing. When you understand what you are trying to achieve and how that is being brought about, then you can make the changes necessary when they are necessary. You can make the decisions for yourself and your children. You are in control. So the most important thing, because it's the end to which we are ordering ourselves, is this definition of classical education, the slide for which is up here now. This is just one definition. There are other definitions, but this is the definition that has to do with the end that we are trying to achieve. Classical education is the cultivation of wisdom and virtue by nourishing the soul on truth, goodness, and beauty, so that in Christ the student is better able to know, glorify, and enjoy God. This involves habits of mind, that is, ways of thinking about reality, ways of proceeding in investigation. Those are both habits of mind. It's how you move toward your intellectual goal. That's one habit of mind. It's an intellectual habit, one kind of. And among that, there will be differences depending on what the intellectual goal is. And then there's also the specific formation of the intellect that you achieve by learning specific things. And that provides a formation of mind also. And some of it is transferable. I mean, so in two ways. For example, say you learn Euclid's elements, his geometry, you do the 13 books. Well, you're developing a habit of mind, a habit of proceeding, of reasoning. You're also developing habits, intellectual habits of knowledge. You learn specific things, like point is that which has no parts, and a line is breadthless length, and the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the squares on the other sides of the triangle. Things like that. Those are intellectual habits. And in order to do the later books in Euclid, you have to do the earlier books. So some intellectual habits precede other intellectual habits. Now, in grade school, we are focused more, though not exclusively, but more on the habits of mind that have to do with how you proceed, the tools of learning, knowing how to approach a subject. And we do this in various ways. We do this by providing models. We do this by encouraging the children to investigate areas and guiding them in that investigation. We do this by having them recognize and then construct their own arguments, which of course have to have a certain procedure, a certain methodology in order to make sense. So we're working on, in our program, this classical program, these habits of mind. And that belongs especially to a classical program, both the methods of approach and the specific content. Now, there's a very interesting thing about this that I like to share with my families when I'm working with them, and that is that classical education is a perfection of the intellect, right? We have a capacity to know and to know how to proceed, and in this program, we are perfecting or bringing to realization those capacities, okay? So, when we learn new things, we are being perfected. And because we're made in God's image and likeness, when we are perfected, and when we realize the capacities that we have, then we're more truly in God's image and likeness. St. Thomas explains that, we're made in God's image and likeness because we know and we love. He knows and loves. It's because we're made in His image that we have that ability to know and love. Now, when we're actually knowing and loving, we're more like Him. We're more perfect. Our nature is perfected. And when we actually know and love Him, who is the highest object of both intellect and will, then we are operating as perfectly as we can in this life, and then we are most of all like Him, right? So, classical education, which, we saw in that definition that we had last slide, is ordered to having us know, glorify, and enjoy God. So, as we achieve that end, we are becoming more like God by knowing Him, right? So, classical education is in a very, very real and literal sense preparing us for heaven. And bringing us as close to that as is possible here, because it has the same end, identically, as the end of all men. the knowledge of the very highest object of truth, God himself. When we die, and assuming that we die in God's grace, then we are going to see God directly. We will know even as we are known. We will see him face to face. There will be no veil between us and him. So we will know as perfectly as it is possible to know. And classical education has that as its goal. Now, it can't have as its goal the supernatural knowledge of God because, I mean, as a, when you're talking about classical education in terms of the natural capacities of man, it can only be ordered to what man can know naturally. But it is ordered to the knowledge of God and to union with him insofar as that's possible in this life. And that is the end of our life as a whole. So, it's really wonderful. Classical education is the education of a man as a man. It's the education which is proper to him because of his nature. And it's ordered in its nature to what we are ordered to by our nature. I think that's really cool. Now, there are other ways of looking at classical education, but the interesting thing is they lead to the same thing. Now, this triangle up here on the screen, it comes from, in its origination, a discussion by St. Thomas in his commentary on Boethius's De Trinitate, question 5, where he lays out what education is. He says that you start with the liberal arts, that's the trivium and the quadrivium. The trivium consists of the arts of grammar, rhetoric, and logic. The quadrivium consists of the arts of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. All 7 of those are arts, that is, they produce a product. The product is realized in the maker, but they all produce a product. They prepare the mind, they develop the habits of thought and the content that makes it possible to do the sciences. So science here does not mean experimental sciences like, chemistry, biology, like that. Science here means those things about which you can have universal and unchanging knowledge. In the case of the sciences, the mind doesn't make anything. The agent who's knowing doesn't construct anything. We are entirely measured by the things that God has made and which we come to know. So it's different than the arts, but the arts are ordered to it, to the sciences. And these sciences consist of things like the physics of Aristotle, the study of nature, the de anima, the study of the soul, the ethics, the politics. Those are things about which we can have universal and unchanging knowledge. And then that's ordered to natural theology or metaphysics, which is a discussion of what's foundational to those sciences, what they depend on. So partly it's ideas about like what's necessary to have knowledge at all. Like there's a recognition that's explicitly discussed in metaphysics that the notion that a thing cannot both be and not be at the same time in the same respect is foundational to all knowledge. That's something that comes up in metaphysics, or the whole is greater than its parts. It's something that's utilized in terms of just what you come to know. It also moves toward the causes, right? What are the causes of these things we know in the sciences? And examines them in a more universal way than they are studied in any one of the particular sciences. And because of that, within metaphysics, one comes to a knowledge of the first cause, the cause of causes, who is God. And Aristotle, though a pagan and without the benefit of revelation, understood that that first cause is immaterial and intelligent. He describes that first cause as a thought thinking itself. It's amazing that he was able to come to that just with his reason, which is why we call it natural theology, because within that discipline you do come to these foundational understandings about God and inevitably about some of his attributes, because there are certain things that have to be true if something is pure act. There's no potentiality in it, right? So now St. Thomas says, for those of us who are believers, natural theology is not the capstone. For Aristotle, that was as good as you could get, right? But because we have the benefit of revelation, all of this, the trivium, the quadrivium, the sciences, natural theology, it's all leading to sacred theology. It's all making it possible for us to understand the highest and most noble object insofar as we can, right? So because we have the benefit of the supernatural order of divine revelation, we can actually study God in a way that you couldn't without that added help. So once again, you see, we are back to knowing God is the end. But in this schema, you see what the specific kind of steps in that progression are. So again, it's the arts, leading to the sciences, leading to natural theology, leading to sacred theology. Okay, now, in the Mother of Divine Grace program, we are doing all of these disciplines, but we are doing them as is appropriate to the student's stage of formation. All learning is cyclical. We learn first at an introductory level, and then we come back to the same objects at a deeper level. I think this is easiest to see, probably, in mathematics, because, everybody first masters counting, and then the very next step they take is to learn the four operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and they use those operations with respect to whole numbers. But the rest of one's mathematical career is spent learning the power of those operations. So one adds, subtracts, multiplies, and divides fractions after whole numbers. And then adds, subtracts, multiplies, and divides decimals, and then percents, and then algebraic expressions, and then trigonometric functions, and finally, well, maybe not finally, but then in calculus, you are adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. You go on using those four operations with respect to quantum physics. Your whole mathematical career is, in a way, a deepening of your understanding of the power of those operations. So you learn it first on a very simple level, but then you keep coming back to it, keep applying it over and over again to different matter, new matter, where you increases the depth of your understanding. Another place where I think this is very clear to us is in salvation history. We start out learning that Jesus came to save us from our sins, that our first parents fell, that there is a period of, developing understanding among most, among the Jews anyway, of who God is and what our right relationship to Him is, and what redemption is, and over a quite long period of time that then led to the coming of Christ. And then you have the order of grace, the formation of the church, the guidance and development of doctrine in the church. That's something that you learn when you're very young on a very basic level. You will spend the rest of your life coming to understand that more fully. You keep coming back and reflecting on that. And as adults, we're doing that. And the church knows that's one of the reasons why we have the scriptures in front of us every day at Mass. So, you see that this is how people learn. It's cyclic. It's true in every field, including the liberal arts and sciences. So that's the point for this exposition, right? What young children do, if those of us who are directing them are knowledgeable about the ends of education, are exercises that prepare their minds and hearts for the deepest level of natural and finally supernatural knowledge. So, in the earliest years, one helps the student strengthen and make docile his imagination by exercises in observation, memorization, and sequential ordering. And one does this with a matter that prepares the mind and heart for the later deep truths. So at this level, children make their acquaintance with salvation history, something they will study all their lives. They're also introduced to the good and the beautiful in many areas as a preparation for the true as such later on. They learn the basis of all arithmetic. They develop an acquaintance with the geometric figures. They are exposed to great music and study God's effects in nature, including in the heavens. Those are all the beginnings of the arts of the quadrivium. They learn the basis of all language arts, reading and writing, which constitutes the beginning of the trivium. As the student matures, he continues to perfect these methods and subjects. He keeps coming back to them at a deeper level, developing his habits of thought. For example, in language arts preparation, one is clearly preparing for the trivium done in its fullness. So once again, the trivium consists of the arts of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And it's worth noting that all of these have to do with speech in some way or another. So grammar is concerned with the construction of the sentence, right? And its principles are the ways of signifying that determine the parts of speech. So you notice there's a construction and it has to do with speech. Logic concerns the common method of procedure in all the sciences and principally considers definition and reasoning, both of which are carried on through speech. Now, once again, you have a construction because you construct the syllogism, and you have this matter, which has to do with speech. Rhetoric is the art of speaking persuasively. And all of these, and so obviously that has to do with speech, and you are constructing a persuasive speech, okay? In all of these, there is a making then, right? Because you make a statement, you make an argument, you make a speech. And they all have to do with speech. So in every curriculum in our individual classical schools in our houses, we are working on perfecting these first connections with the arts that lead to the sciences that lead to natural and sacred theology. Further, young students work on argumentation so that they can eventually use rhetoric in the service of the truly noble. We teach our students to summarize. By that I mean order items according to importance rather than just chronology. We teach them to identify an argument and then construct their own arguments. We teach them to develop their thoughts in paragraphs so that they can develop them later in essays and in papers using the rhetorical modes, namely exposition, argumentation, description, and narration. With our older children, we explicitly introduce the ends of rhetoric into their regular assignments. Okay, rhetoric is of three kinds. There's the political, the forensic, and the ceremonial. The political aims at establishing whether a proposed course of action is expedient or inexpedient, if it makes sense or not, if it's going to accomplish its end or not. The forensic has to do with determining whether an action done was just or unjust, and the ceremonial concerns itself with whether someone deserves praise or blame. In our high school program, we discuss and write about all three types of actions and characters. We do that because, in my experience, students in the rhetorical stage are really interested in these questions. They're interested in the high and noble. They care about what is good and bad. They care about who is blameworthy and praiseworthy. So I've always found that if you frame your questions around the ends of rhetoric, you will get more discussion, more participation, more interest. And so you'll notice in our high school program that all of our assignments are framed around these questions. This is a very real preparation for, and as a matter of fact, it's a participation in the art of rhetoric. Now, we prepare for the sciences too. So I've already explained that, we lay the foundation for the liberal arts, and I just talked about, for example, rhetoric, talked about the arts of the quadrivium and the trivium. But it is also true that we lay the foundation for the sciences that those liberal arts are ordered to. We introduce our children to great literature, a lot of it. Through these works, the student gains a sort of experience. The great works of literature appeal to the imagination and move the affections rightly. They present or imply profoundly important views of human life and reality as a whole. Similarly, the great works of history provide vicarious moral experience. It's a wonderful way to acquire moral experience, right? You see the effects without having to suffer them. Those great works of history also give us a conception of human society, of the common good to which societies are or should be ordered, and an awareness of the greatest issues mankind faces. And all of this prepares the student very well to read the more difficult things that he will come to later, right? Such as Plato's dialogues and the ethics and politics of Aristotle. We introduce our children to the arguments of our founding fathers with regard to the nature of the republic and the particular incarnation of the form of mixed government that was appropriate to us in this new land. This is definitely the beginning of the study of the politics. We have our children study natural science, particularly animal behavior, as a beginning to the study of the soul. Now, Aristotle explains to us, soul is immaterial, you can't see it. How you come to know about the soul is through its effects, right? And he explains that in order to do that, what you need to look at is the object of the activity, like food is the object of the activity of digestion. You look at the activity, digestion. That tells you about the power of the soul. This soul has that power, and that tells you about the kind of soul. So in the De Anima, Aristotle leads us through those steps. In our natural science, which we ordinarily do in 10th grade history, we are beginning that study by having the children notice the powers that are exhibited in the behavior of the animals. So, for those of us who are consciously aware of the fullness of the classical curriculum, there's an intentional ordering of the parts of this curriculum to that curriculum, so that the fullness of classical education can be achieved as excellently as possible when the time is right, and the students are getting it on the appropriate level as they're proceeding through the program. Now, as regards the highest object of the classical curriculum, God Himself, the end of natural and supernatural theology, we are preparing our children for that knowledge from the day they are born. We do that by the way we live, by the example we give them of fatherhood and of sacrificial love, and by the doctrine we teach them as soon as they are able to reason. All of this is their first introduction to the greatest truths and to the object they will, with God's grace, contemplate in eternity. Now, I'm fond of saying this, and if you've listened to any of these others, you've heard me say it, and if you heard me speak somewhere, you probably heard me say it. But I'm going to say it again anyway, because it's appropriate here. Though all men think, thinking can be done well or badly, and one can be taught to do it well. In large measure, the role of the teacher of grade school and high school children is just this, teaching children to think well. To do that, however, one must be familiar with how thinking takes place in the human person. So, I'm going to give a summary of the exposition given by Aristotle in the De Anima, Book 3. Now, his explanation comes from a remarkably complex series of considerations, and I'm not going to give all those considerations. So, I'm just summarizing the conclusions, and therefore, necessarily, I'm not doing justice to the whole. Nonetheless, as I think every teacher should have at least a general understanding of this process, I'm going to go ahead and give this summary, defective though it may be. So, first of all, one receives the form of the thing outside through his proper senses. He sees, hears, tastes, smells, or touches it, or any combination of those things, right? And he's actually receiving the form of that thing, because if he didn't receive the form of that thing, he wouldn't know that thing. If it was just a likeness of that thing, then it would be, what he would actually know would be a likeness, not the thing. So Aristotle reasons too. We have to receive the form of the thing, but we receive it differently than it exists outside of us, right? So this bottle on my table, it has the form of the bottle. The form is the thing that makes it be what it is, and that exists in the bottle in such a way as to make the bottle be what it is. But when I receive that form through my eyes or through my hand, when it touches it, feels the temperature, that kind of thing, when I receive that, I don't receive it in such a way as to make me a bottle. I receive it immaterially. So I receive the form, but I receive it in the way that the senses can receive, which is this immaterial reception. Oh, there's a lot of interesting stuff in that De Anima. But anyway, I don't want to get lost here. Okay, so you receive the form of the thing into your proper senses. Then those forms received into the different proper senses are integrated in what we call the common sense. This is the sense that just puts together the information received from the proper senses. It integrates it. So, and that's why it's called the common sense, because it's the power that's common to all the senses. So, my eyes see that the thing on the table is white, my tongue knows that it's sweet, but my eyes don't know that it's sweet and my tongue doesn't know that it's white, but I know that it's the same thing that is both white and sweet. So obviously, the information received by the eyes and the information received, and notice that's information, my sense has been informed. It has received the form, right? So the information received by the eyes and the mouth tongue is integrated in the common sense. Okay, and so then what happens is that just as the proper senses have received from the external objects and the common sense has received from the proper senses, the imagination, or what we call the brain, receives now this integrated form from the common sense. But the interesting thing about this power, the power of the imagination, is that it retains what it's received, which is not true in the proper sense or the common sense, right? In the proper senses and the common sense, you have to actually be actively using your power. You have to be seeing the object in order for that form to be in the proper sense. When you close your eyes or you take your hand away, then you no longer are receiving that form. It's not there anymore. But in the imagination, the form is retained so that we can produce at will the images of the objects we have sensed. So because of that, Aristotle compares the power of the imagination to a wax slate. The forms which come from the senses are like seals pressed into the wax. Sometimes that wax is hard, and then the seal has to be pressed over and over and over and over in order to make the image. It doesn't make an impression, right? We speak that way. Sometimes the wax is too soft and the seal makes an impression the first time, but the wax kind of mushes and the image is gone. When your child, you've explained something, it seems like he gets it. He says, yeah, Mom, got it. And then the next day you bring it up and he just looks at you with a blank expression. He may have gotten it, but it didn't stick, right? But sometimes the wax is just the right consistency. And then the image is nice and clear, so to speak, sharp around the edges, faithful image, and it's retained by the imagination, and it can be recalled on command. Now, this integrated object, which is received into the imagination, into the brain, is passed on to the power that Aristotle calls the vis cogitativa, or thinking power, which is in the imagination. The function of this power is to sort the received objects into like kinds. Now, this doesn't require universal knowledge. It just deals with the particulars in front of it, just sorting them. So the analogy I like to use is this object on the screen, that sorting toy that most of our babies have used. So the baby picks up the block, in the shape of a triangle, and sees that it fits in the triangle-shaped hole, so he puts the block in there. And similarly, he sees that the circle-shaped cylinder fits in that circle-shaped hole, and he puts it in. He's not making some kind of general consideration of triangularity or circleness, He just sees a likeness between those two things. And the vis cogitativa works like that. It sorts the images received into the imagination into like kinds. So like all the chairs go in one part, all the trees go in another part, that kind of thing. I was once on a plane coming back from a homeschool conference, and I picked up the magazine, in the pocket in front of me, and it had a really interesting article about using an MRI to map the electrical impulses in the body. And it was particularly interesting to me because it talked about these electrical impulses originating in the proper senses, and then being passed along through nerves to the base of the brain, and at that point being separated, like some of the impulses went to the right front lobe, and one went to the lower left lobe or whatever. They went to different parts of the brain. I thought, gosh, that's amazing. Aristotle didn't have an MRI to map those electrical impulses, but he figured it out. It has to work that way. You have to separate those things into like kinds. And the reason you have to do it is because of the next step in the process of thinking. These images, retained in the imagination and sorted into their various like kinds, are used as objects by what Aristotle calls the agent intellect, which is the active power of the mind. This power, so to speak, shines a light on those collected images in the imagination, and in virtue of this light, the universal form or the nature of the object is abstracted from that collection and received. So say this again. The agent intellect abstracts what's common. All those chairs have something in common that we can call chairness. That's what the agent intellect sort of takes out of that collection. It sees what's common. It abstracts that form, which is the universal nature or the essence, and that's received into the possible intellect. And it's in that reception that understanding takes place. So that's pretty cool. But knowing that, you see clearly that the condition of the image is of great importance in the effectiveness of the understanding, right? And Aristotle says in chapter 7 of book 3 of the De Anima that even concepts concerning immaterial objects like truth and beauty require an image. This is how we learn. We use images which are the objects for the agent intellect, and the agent intellect acts on those images, abstracting the nature which is received into the possible intellect. So, given that that's the case, well, it tells us something about, what we need to pay attention to as educators. As educators, we're concerned about perfecting whatever we can of every part of the process of thinking. But there's not a lot you can do about the way the proper senses work. You can get glasses or hearing aids, but that's about it. And there's not a lot you can do about the way the common sense works. Now, some people have sensory integration dysfunction, which is a problem in the common sense. And there are some programs you can get that help kids sort out all the sensory information they're receiving and figure out what to focus on, which is what the common sense ordinarily does naturally, programs like Fast Forward. But, it's hard, and there's not a lot you can do about that. And truthfully, for most people, the common sense works pretty well. But that wax slate, the imagination, what we call the brain, the receptive capacity of the brain, that's something we can do a lot about. The formation of the imagination is something that we want to have in our view as we are educating our children. And in our program, we work on this training of the imagination in every level of our program. We are exercising the imagination so that it is receptive, docile, receives the image that it's given and receives it well, and then that it's able to recall the object on command. So the strength and the docility of the imagination are something we work on in every level of our program. And in the primary and grammatical stages, which is below the stage we're talking about today, but for children in the primary and grammatical stage, kindergarten, pre-K through 5th, we work on memorizing, observing, and sequencing because those activities strengthen and make docile the imagination. In the analytical stage, what we're talking about today, we're focused on using that imagination and, hopefully a trained imagination so that it's going to be easier for the imagination to serve in this way. But we're also exercising the imagination. So even if, for example, you say you weren't doing our program in the earlier years, it's still the case that what you want to do for the 6th through 9th grade student is summarize, analyze, and work on recognizing arguments. First of all, they're just ready to do that by nature. And because this is built in to their development, even if you weren't working on memorizing, observing, and sequencing in the early years, they were. Little kids memorize naturally. They observe with great detail. And they always are sequencing. This happened first, then this happened. We went to the store and then we did this. Or I read this story and this is what happened first, this is what happened second, this is what happened third. Children just naturally do that. I think it's good to recognize the importance of those activities and so enhance them, which is what we're trying to do in our program. But even if you weren't in our program, they were doing that. Now they're ready to analyze, summarize, analyze, and recognize arguments. And in doing that, they are also going to be strengthening and making docile their imagination in the way that's appropriate for this stage. And then in the rhetorical stage, our goal is for them to articulate arguments eloquently, present policy positions coherently and accurately. And to do that well, you need a trained imagination so you can hold on to the argument and think about the audience and think about what needs to be presented, both sides, in order to be persuasive. But again, very doing of it is an exercise of the imagination. So we're always aware of the importance of the imagination in thinking. And, so in terms of what's up here on the screen right now, this all has to do with the methodology, not about what it is you're memorizing, observing, and sequencing, or what you're summarizing, or what arguments you're looking at, or what arguments you're making. That's not on this slide. But that's the stuff that we talked about before. It's the beginnings, it's the content, and the content is the beginnings of the liberal arts, of the sciences, of natural and sacred theology. So in a way, the whole point of this exposition is that you will understand that both the content studied is important, and the way you approach how you study it and what you do with it is also important. It's both the what and the how, and that's the goal. Both aspects of formation are important, and the training of the imagination makes thinking possible. So, as I said at the very beginning, I think you need to see both the beginning and the end to understand the process. We begin with laying the foundation of the tools of thinking, the training of the imagination, sequencing, memorization, and observation. And we provide training in writing skills, thinking skills, and the mathematical progressions. These skills are used with a specific content that has to do with the foundations of the liberal arts and the sciences. It also has to do with an ordering towards some specific content in our own program. We order, not by any means the only things we talk about, right, but there's a way in which our high school program is ordered to 3 central arguments. The motives of credibility, which has to do with the argument whereby one shows by reason that God exists and his attributes, and that because of that we owe him worship, and leads through a series of steps to the Catholic Church as the true church. And I would like every child who graduates from my program to be able to make that argument. Also, we spend a lot of time, of over 4 years, we have an overarching argument in our history program that's about the virtue of a mixed government. We do lots of other things too. We have U.S. history, we have world history, we have government and economics, and within each of those there are specific things that we are talking about, and I'll talk about those when I talk about the rhetorical stage. But there is this overarching 4-year conversation about the virtue of a mixed government. And, one could pick something else. I picked that because I think we live in a time where people really, really need to know what the function of government is, what the best kind of government is, what the U.S. government is supposed to be, in order to be responsible citizens. Even when they live outside the United States, I think this is an important consideration. And then that notion of what makes something a substance. When do you have a new thing? What's the difference between, an accidental change that doesn't change the nature and a substantial change where you get something new? How do you recognize that? All of that we're pointing to over and over again in our science program, and that's a preparation eventually for understanding certain foundational philosophic distinctions. Okay, so we'll talk about this more, but it's important to know that all of these goals are present in every assignment, either directly or indirectly. And the reason I say that is because of this slide on the screen now. In every assignment in Mother of Divine Grace, there are 4 kinds of goals. There's the immediate method, the immediate content, and then the later formation to which this method is ordered, and the later knowledge to which the content is ordered. So the method at this level, that is the level we're talking about today, is to summarize, analyze, collate information, recognize an argument, learn how to order material in an order of importance, and construct an argument. Those are our methodological goals. These activities are all intended to help the student improve his ability to construct and hold an argument in his mind. He needs a strong and docile imagination to do that. There's a strong emphasis on clear thinking in these grades, that is 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, with many opportunities for analysis in matters that are commensurate with the young mind, such as grammar. Grammar is central to the curriculum in this analytic period of 6th through 9th grade. There's a particular emphasis on seeing relationships between various parts of a whole in the 9th grade. That starts by seeing the relationship between the various parts of the whole sentence, which we do in 6th grade. And it's encouraged and, carried forward by using the writing exercises as they're laid out in our curriculum. And then writing is emphasized in a particular way in 9th grade. Now there are also content goals, which are found in the MODG scope and sequence charts and the text used and reasons why charts, which are available to you. The later formation to which this is ordered is the ability to order thoughts, both chronologically and by order of importance, and to recognize, produce, or construct an ordered argument and present it cohesively, and persuasively. That's where we want to go. The later knowledge to which the content is ordered varies according to the subject matter, of course, but, as I was saying, 9th grade religion, an explicit foundation is laid for that argument, for the motives of credibility that I was talking about, and the same thing is true in history. We're explicitly working on the foundation of that argument regarding the nature of government. Okay, so now I want to look more closely at 6th grade. 6th grade is a transitional year. Students are beginning to move from, the grammatical stage into this logical or analytical stage, and so that means we're beginning to shift our emphasis in teaching methodology. They still work on observation and memorization, but they're adding analytical exercises, particularly in English and Latin grammar. Students will be learning to identify the parts of speech and the function of those parts in a sentence. They will diagram sentences. They will write summaries. They will produce outlines. They will read about a topic, analyze the information from various sources, and collate that information in a report. This last exercise, which is very formative, develops habits of thought, is done in the history paper. This year, history focuses on ancient Egypt. The children read many sources, and as they read, they analyze the material and they categorize it. So, for example, all the sources they read have some information on pyramids. As that information is read, it is naturally sorted and categorized and then stored in a, so to speak, file folder in the head titled Pyramid. After reading many sources on Egyptian information, the student is asked to write a paper on what he knows about Egypt in various areas. So he has the opportunity to see what he's put together from all those various pieces of information from the different sources, and that he has a coherent whole on the different topics. So it's not a research paper, It's a paper that's intended to give them an opportunity to see what they've been doing with their mind, that they have sorted, analyzed, sorted, and categorized this information. That's the goal. All of the subjects this year are intended to provide an opportunity to learn how to analyze, which is ordered to understanding and producing an argument. That is something that children at this age are usually pretty good at. So we are attempting to capitalize on their natural stage of development by guiding that propensity to argue into an academic channel. Okay, so we are going to look at the specific texts and why we use them, but I do have a few comments as we go along here. The student is asked to do some analysis in religion. He writes short summaries of the readings in the Gospel of St. Luke in the second semester. We don't ask summaries of the students until 6th grade because summarizing is an analytic skill. You have to be able to read something, determine the main point in the story, and then reveal it either orally or in writing without including extraneous material. Now, that sounds easy for us, I mean, that just doesn't sound like it's that difficult to do. But just like all the other skills we acquire, it actually takes practice. So generally speaking, children are not ready to summarize until they get to this analytic stage. And we use the summaries of the Gospel of St. Luke as a transitional exercise into this analytic state. And just so you know, there are a lot of 6th graders who are still not able to find the main point in the chapter of Luke and then tell how all the parables relate to that main idea. They're just not ready to do that. You might see that they're still retelling the entire story rather than summarizing by finding the main point. Now, if that happens, then what you do is you adjust the assignment because you know what you're aiming for. You're aiming for this ability to locate the most important idea so that you can produce a summary, right? So if the child is having trouble with that, you ask him to just tell the most important thing in the chapter. That way, he's still performing the primary formation exercise, which is looking at a whole, seeing the parts, and determining an order among those parts. But he's just finding the most important thing rather than creating a whole summary. And since the subject matter is the gospel, any point he picks is important. It's that developing that habit of looking for what's most important that is important in those exercises. By 9th grade, in my experience, the majority of students are able to accomplish this writing skill. And this is just a note, just a note here. But for our special needs students, we sometimes use the 6th grade religion as a writing course for older students who are struggling with writing because it is so good in helping them develop that habit of looking for what is important rather than what comes first. Okay. Now, in writing, in this year, our main focus is generally to practice consistency in writing with first, second, or third person. So don't move from third to first or first to third or stick in a U there, determine a mode, am I writing in the first person? Then write the whole thing in the first person. Later on, we're going to really emphasize just writing in the third person for formal papers, but right now what we want is consistency. And we want consistent verb tenses. So we look for that in those summaries that we ask them to write. Yeah, and I just want to mention this too, though it doesn't have to do with a specific book, but it's kind of an overarching thing that I want to make sure I say. There should be still in 6th grade an hour a day and possibly even more of directed reading time, and you should still plan on having one-on-one meeting times with your student. So you can, discuss the religion or discuss the history so that you can ask questions that guide the child's thinking and understanding about what he's read. Discussion is always crucial to the right formation. And I do want to mention, too, in the language arts there, you notice we have voyages in English, okay, which is or easy grammar. I'll talk about those in a second. But we also still have writing road to reading in 6th grade. We used writing road to reading in 2nd grade, I think. Certainly in 3rd, 4th, 5th. This is the last year in the curriculum where we have writing road to reading, which is a kind of phonics instruction. But by 6th grade, you're not, clearly for most people, you're not trying to use it to teach reading. Rather, you're using it to apply analytic skills to language study and see how English is a complex whole following complex rules, but very consistent within its structures. That's the point of having it. Let's see. Oh, and I also want to mention Yeah, so this is going to come up on the next slide, which has the fine arts. So Sue, I'm going to ask you to move to the next slide, but then I want to come back to this one. Thanks. Okay, so our art program here, the calligraphy, Art 7 for young Catholics, and the music, where we use Alfred's Essentials of Music Theory, and then also make suggestions for specific pieces of classical music to listen to, are really well suited to the stage of formation. The student needs to analyze the letters he's using in the calligraphy to see how the line is used to make those letters. So he's analyzing, right? He's isolating pieces of a whole. Art 7 for young Catholic provides the life of Christ in pictures, which really goes well with the religion reading of the Gospel of Luke. And making the correlations between the text and the illustration requires a certain analysis. And it's just good to expose the student to beautiful art and beautiful music. I'd also like to point to the science program here, the TOPS balance beam and pendulum. I really like these units because they're so well suited to the analytic mode of instruction. Now, the science doesn't take up a whole lot of time in 6th grade, and we are beta testing some additions, but it is so useful to actually do the balance beam and the pendulum, because in both cases, but especially the balance beam, one is being given an opportunity to make inductions from his experience that lead to the statement of a universal principle. And that so tells the student something about how the mind works. There's a way in which the whole thing in 6th grade is ordered to seeing, even if not explicitly, at least implicitly, this is what the mind does. This is how I learn. It's part of that, classical emphasis on the methodology, the way of approaching things, working with the natural inclinations of the soul, but enhancing them by exercising them. Okay, so let's go back for a minute. Let's see. I think I wanted to mention, with the religion. So we are still doing the Baltimore Catechism, which if you've listened to any of these modules, you know I really love. I think that the Baltimore Catechism is distilled St. Thomas. Using it actually improves the student's ability to think, because they talk about developing a habit of thought. The doctrine is so clearly and concisely and accurately stated, provides model after model after model of what's necessary in order to understand something. And it uses a very specific appropriate language. It increases the student's vocabulary because it's a very precise vocabulary. I think it's important. We've talked about how we use the Gospels of Luke, but the Gospels of Mark, we have a series of questions. They're in Designing Our Classical Curriculum, and I think they're also in the syllabus these days, which are designed to have students do two things at least. One is to develop their ability to pay close attention to their reading, because they read a chapter and then they have to answer questions about it. And I ask my students to actually find the place in the text that answer comes from. And then some of the questions are inferential in nature. Not a lot, but some. And that's important because it's encouraging the student to take the information he's gotten from his reading and then see something that is implied though not explicitly stated. And we do the Gospels of Mark, the Gospel of Mark. We do these exercises orally because because both of those are somewhat difficult tasks for the 6th grade student, and doing them orally makes it easier for them. And then they're also working on oral expression, which is a skill all by itself. Okay, the math we use, say half or more than half of our families are using the Saxon Math 76. We like it because it is, at this level, it has good explanations for the student of the mathematical concepts. It employs that circular method, so once something is learned, you keep coming back to it, and you never forget what you have been introduced to because you keep exercising that knowledge as you move through the lessons. We like that a lot. I would say a quarter maybe of our families have moved to the teaching textbooks series, which also works well. The only thing you need to know about teaching textbooks, if you're interested in it, is that you need to be a grade level ahead. It's just geared a little below. So teaching textbook 6 should be used in 5th grade. And teaching textbook 7 should be used in 6th grade. That makes it possible for you to do teaching textbooks Algebra 1 in 8th grade, and you're going to need to do that if you're going to stay with the teaching textbook series, because you need to get through the pre-calculus before you take your college entrance exams. If you do, you'll do well. If you don't, you won't. So I like to tell people that at this point. Let's see. I like the Great Editing Adventure because it takes 3 minutes a day but draws the children's attention to punctuation, which I find they often need to have their attention drawn to. Voyages in English and Easy Grammar are both good grammar books, and grammar is essential in 6th grade because it's so perfectly, it's an analytic exercise that is perfectly commensurate to the abilities of the students. So I always say to a mom, if you're having trouble getting to everything and you need to cut, don't cut the grammar. But we do offer these 2 different breakdowns for grammar. Voyages in English is something that you would use when the student can work with his mom. The doctrine's clearer, honestly. The doctrine of grammar is clearer, but it doesn't have the built-in repetition. You kind of have to use the text to get the most out of it. Easy Grammar, the explanations aren't quite as good, but that repetition is built in. Once somebody learns a concept, they use it in every subsequent sentence. So in that way, Easy Grammar, in that way, it's better. That's an excellence that it has. So, with families I work with, I encourage them to think about, is mom going to be able to do this with them, with the child? If so, I'd use the Voyages. Is mom not going to be able to? In that case, use Easy Grammar. Okay. The poetry in 6th grade is nice poems. And, they're all in the harp and laurel wreath. The poems that are chosen, all 8 years, have applicability to the child's situation, maybe, and what they're studying in their history, or because of their literary merit, or both. Many of these poems will be referred to in literature the student reads throughout his lifetime, so the things you want to be familiar with. I want to mention the Fundamentals of Latin 1 and Beginning Latin 3. These are our new Latin program, developed in-house. I love this program. My daughter Margaret developed the program. She did it after teaching our advanced Latin for a number of years. She noticed where the kids were having trouble in the advanced Latin and also what made them stop doing Latin. And I remember her saying, Mom, they shouldn't be having these problems. This stuff that they're really, getting stuck with, they could have learned, inside and out earlier. Why didn't they learn that? And so eventually she decided that she was going to make sure they did. And that's what this Latin program came from. In the Beginning Latin 3, in the whole series, there's an emphasis on endings and stems, and that really helps the students avoid mistakes that using other Latin programs tends to encourage. You don't make the mistake of adding in extra vowels because you know what the stem actually is. And then we've also made a concentrated effort in Beginning Latin 3 to pay attention to adjective-noun agreement, something that requires observation and is a significant help as the student moves on in Latin. we're trying to utilize the gifts of the stages of formation, but also use the matter that caused the kids trouble when they moved on in Latin. So I really like this, and just one general plug for Latin. Every study ever done with this, with that object in view, has shown that kids who do Latin do better intellectually, academically, across the board, not just in language, but even in mathematics. Latin, in a way, organizes the brain. So I urge you, think of it as a test preparation course if you're not, just naturally drawn to Latin. It's or as a, just a like mental exercise that's preparing your child for higher education, because it's probably one of the most important things you can do in terms of preparing them for later academic success. And you know what? It's true even for kids who struggle. That was some of those studies I was looking into. It's amazing. Even special needs students who did at least 20 minutes, I mean, even 20 minutes of Latin a day, improved their test scores dramatically. So I just really urge you to do your Latin. Okay, and then Sue, can you go to the next? Thanks. Let me see. Well, you know what? We've really talked about all of these already, so that's good. I think we can move on. Now, in seventh grade is, within the same stage of formation. The focus in writing moves to summarizing events as a whole with a clear beginning, middle, and end, if the order is chronological. But if it's an order of importance, which is what we're really directing ourselves to, we want to make sure that all the key parts are present in the explanation. Just as an example, if somebody was going to talk about the Greek gods in his history paper, he absolutely couldn't leave out Zeus, right? And in terms of the kind of general writing skills, what we're looking at in seventh grade is the use of pronouns and their agreement with their antecedent. I do want to mention at this point that one of the resources, in the resource section of the syllabi is a really nice writing chart that, if you look at, you can see at a glance what's the main focus for the given year, and what was the main focus for the year before, and what's the main focus for the upcoming year, and then what's the subsidiary focus. And just having that in mind can really help. I think that it's important to see, rubrics are really not any good unless the person who has the rubrics being applied is aware of what they are. You can't expect people to do what they haven't been told to do. So I like to go over those writing charts with my kids. And, we have both a checklist type, so you could use it like, oh yeah, on this paper I have this skill and check them off. But we also have this, what I prefer even more is the 3 grade levels to 1 page. That's just our rating rubrics. It's not a checklist, but it sure is easy to see. And anyway, look at the resources and you'll see what I mean. Generally speaking, the students in 7th grade really are in that kind of analytic or logical stage. So we're focusing on analysis, which is ordered to understanding and presenting an argument or position on some matter. That's the main emphasis in the teaching method for these next few years. As I mentioned before, arguments are usually something kids at this age are good at. So, we want to work with their natural stage of development to channel that propensity to argue into more positive subjects than our rules, right? Something academically focused. This year, 7th grade, the goal for history and religion is to help students see reasons for actions or positions that are taken. If you look at the assignments, you will see that they are always focused around or framed around what's the reason? What's the reason for this? History focuses on ancient Greek and ancient Roman civilizations. Religion focuses on a detailed study of the Acts of the Apostles and early church history. In history and religion, both, but especially in history, oh, I'm so glad you're listening to this. The answers to the questions at the end of the chapters are very important. They should be done as described in the syllabus. Include those page numbers, which encourages close textual reading. And make sure that every answer to the questions that make you think or the questions that test your character is a minimum of 3 sentences. We are working here on paragraph development. There should be a topic sentence and supporting sentences. When I have TA students at this age, if they send me a single word answer, I just send it back. And at the beginning of the year, if they send it and it doesn't have a topic sentence and supporting sentences, I accept it, but I point out what would make it a developed paragraph. By the end of the year, if they don't have a topic sentence and supporting sentences, I send it back so that they can redo it and get it right. And I think this is an important part of developing their writing skills. So you want to pay attention to that. The poetry in 7th grade is more difficult. And, I've heard this from a number of people, so I want to address it. Remember that every year should have some easy material for the student, some at his comfort level, and some that's a challenge. The challenge pieces broaden his horizons and give him a clearer perception of reality. No one is comfortable in a reality of which he is the measure. We all know that's phony. I'm not the measure of reality. Shakespeare is challenging. And, so is Herodotus in history, which they also do in 7th grade. But the exposure to more complex language helps the students later on to read difficult material easily. The student who follows this progression will find the 11th grade history literature selections to be well within his powers. I always said to my kids when they would say, "Mom, this is hard," say, "Honey, I'm trying to make your life easier, not harder. If you do this now, you'll be able to do that later easily. That's my goal." And, I think that was a help for them to know that I was actually on their side trying to help with what was coming up. The thing is, I knew what was coming up, and they didn't. Additionally, reading and memorizing the selections from Shakespeare necessitates some kind of analysis of the text, which is an excellent exercise for this stage of formation. And finally, the selections from Henry V, especially the second, prepare students for that deliberation about government that he will be doing in high school that we were talking about earlier. Now, we're going to look at some specific texts and why we use them. But first I have, again, some comments here. Math, if you use 8-7 or the equivalent text in teaching textbooks, it would be teaching textbooks 8, which might be their pre-algebra. It is. It's the pre-algebra. Moves into a more advanced forms, including some introductory algebra and geometry. And those are important skills to practice at this analytic stage so that, that's working well with their stage of formation. I do want to mention that grammar, like we were talking about in 6th grade, is very important at this stage of formation because it involves that kind of analysis of identifying the function of a word in a sentence and coming to a better understanding of the language system. And Latin is also really helpful in understanding the English language. And again, I just want to say, see, the thing is, a lot of us have, larger families. Not all, but a lot. And the kid who is in 7th grade is more capable of working on his own. So we're inclined to just let him do that, which is why I really want to emphasize, really, truly try to have daily or every other day one-on-one meeting. It's the best way to encourage, guide the children's formation, stay on top of what they're doing and where they're doing it. Ask to actually see the completed assignments, even if you're not going to correct it right now, because when children know that somebody's interested enough to ask to see it, then they're more inclined to do it. There's a lot of supplemental reading in the 7th grade, and that, you should be aware of what the child is reading, how far he's getting, what he's thinking about it, if it's too hard, if it's too easy. Be aware of that. And I really like to, at this level, some people are still developing their fluency in reading. In that case, they just need to read what's in the history. But some kids have really gotten past that point, and they're eager readers ready to read lots of material. For a child like that, I encourage you to add what I used to call you pick reading material, some other directed material that either some additional literature books or, I used to have a shelf of just interesting books. It had how to build bridges. I remember there was a book on manners, really liked that one. There was one about how the digestive system worked. One about how the brain worked. I just, I put things that I thought were cool, but I wasn't going to put in the curriculum. Some animal books. Oh, one of those, like David Macaulay's How Things Work, and Scientific American also has a How Things Work book. So they were all on that shelf. And for my quick and eager readers, on their list, I would put, you pick. And they knew that that meant they were supposed to take something from the shelf and read that in addition to whatever other reading they were doing. And, I think that was good for them. So I just mentioned that to you. Okay, let's see here. Okay, Acts of the Apostles, I guess obviously, but it's really good. Well, besides, it's great just in itself for learning about the foundation of our church, the early church, the beginning of the church. It also goes really well with the history. It coordinates well with the history. And the questions that are assigned when they're reading the Acts of the Apostles helps them analyze the material. Those friendly defender cards are also fit with the content of the Acts, since the Acts are about evangelizing, and the defender cards provide students with the tools to do their own evangelizing. And toward the end of the year, we read some of the story of the church, which is a very good kind of overview of the beginning and structure of the church. The students really like that book. Let's see, we talked about the math. Language arts, I'd say much of the same things I said with the 6th grade. I like Voyages because it's doctrinally very sound. It's like Baltimore Catechism. It's the Baltimore Catechism. The First Communion Catechism has questions and very simple answers. Those same questions are included in the Baltimore Catechism #1, the pink book. The answers are more elaborate. And then again, those same questions plus more, but the same questions are included in the gray catechism, the #2. And Voyages works that way too. Voyages 6 goes over, all the parts of speech and all the fundamental notions. Voyages 7 does the same things, reviews all of that, but has a few additional concepts. And Voyages 8 similarly. And then you notice Basic Language Principles is up here. We love Basic Language Principles. It's way harder to get these days. And our Fundamentals 1 Latin is patterned after Basic Language Principles. So just so you know that you can use Fundamentals as part of your language arts program. And so sometimes people have it do double duty, both language arts and Latin. Sometimes people, depending on where they are, they might do beginning Latin 3 and fundamentals 1. So the beginning Latin 3 would be their Latin and fundamentals 1 would be their English. They get a lot of good Latin that way. Let's see. Editor-in-Chief is a nice editing program. The only thing I would say about that is if you're going to use it, just find the errors. Don't make the kids, generally speaking, I would say don't make the kids write it all out because it takes too long. I don't want to spend that much time on editing. And Wordly Wise is a program I really like. It's the best of the vocabulary texts I ever used, and we used a number. It's the only one that actually helped my students use new words rather than just learn them. So, let's see, what else do I want to say? Anything? About art, there are just a number of suggestions that encourage analysis, and they're not hard to do or time consuming. I've found there are things I did with my children, and I found that they really helped foster a love of and appreciation for the visually beautiful. I encourage you to look at them and use them. Okay, let's look at the next one, Sue. In science, we use concepts and challenges, either concepts and challenges B or the concepts and challenges in life science. I always find I have to make some kind of a plug for these books because, they're older books, so people think, why are we using these old books? And they're not, glossy pages. They're not super thick. So I want to tell you, I love these books because they contain foundational and important information, principle-based, which is why we can use them even though they're older. The principle of the lever doesn't change, right? And the principle whereby an electric current works doesn't change. And this book so intelligently sticks to the principles, so it continues to be relevant. And then the format is perfect for encouraging independent work and for helping children develop their writing skills, because there's a question in blue after each paragraph, and the questions are about the main point of the previous paragraph. So when the students answer these questions consistently in complete sentences, they learn what a topic sentence is and how to recognize it. And that's very important. It's an important part of, somebody's writing program. So this text accomplishes a lot, but you can do a lesson in about 20 minutes. So I've always just really liked this. Okay, in music, we use Alfred's Essentials of Music and Meet the Great Composers, book 1 and book 2, and we listen to classical music. And both the Alfreds and the Meet the Great Composers are nice resources that are useful, I think, for students who are even those who are taking an instrument. It's reinforcing and not too teacher intensive. It fits with the general mode of our procedure. Excuse me, namely working on helping students understand principles and then apply them. And then music appreciation is encouraged through the classical music selections, which is also, I think, important for our students to have that appreciation for that kind of beautiful. If we don't give it to them, they won't get it because they're not going to get it in the culture. Okay, so we talked about the poetry already, and yeah, we talked about the history and geography. So I think we can move on to 8th grade. Great. Okay, 8th grade students are still in this analytical stage of development, so the focus is still on understanding and presenting positions on various matters. In writing in 8th grade, the main focus is to summarize, so they're continuing to summarize, but using a consistent voice. That doesn't just mean, person, first, second, or third person, but rather maintaining, a style. So we're working on style. And as a minor focus, we look at the student's command of more advanced uses of punctuation and more complex sentence structure. I always like to see semicolons in an 8th grader's writing. I also want to mention something, because I've been correcting children's work for many years now. Pay attention to the right use of prepositions. Prepositions are causal. That is, they're reflecting some kind of relationship between the object of the preposition and something else. So he is under the table. Okay, that's signifying a relationship between the subject, he, and the table, right? It's true about every prepositional phrase. It's signifying some kind of relationship. So when kids get the prepositions wrong or the prepositional uses wrong, there's something that's not clear in their thinking. So I really recommend that you pay attention to correct prepositional use. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that. And then I always tell my students, I do with from 6th grade up, but especially in 8th grade, I say to them, No, honey, we believe in mastery learning. We work at rewriting and perfecting things. So I will be asking myself about what you write. Does what you're saying actually follow from your opening statement? Are you actually answering the question that it has presented? If it's a retelling, is the story in chronological order with all the important parts? If there's an order of importance, which is more likely, is it reasonable? Does each paragraph have one central idea? Those are all writing skills that are important for the 8th grade student. And, if I say no when I'm reading through the paper, then I ask them to rewrite it rather than move on. I've found that there's much more learning value in one paper done correctly than several papers done in haste. Now, in religion this year, our goal is to explain the doctrine of the church on the sacraments, particularly confirmation. A lot of students are working on confirmation in 8th grade. And there are a number of important writing assignments in the religion course for this year. They all call for analysis. They all require presentation of an argument. They all require good comprehension of the text. The writing in this course in 8th grade is an important step in the MODG writing program. So while it is true that throughout our program, K through 12, we will give credit for religion done orally. That's true because the spoken word is closer to the concept than the written word. When you want somebody to really get something, you have to say it to them. Just reading it is not good enough. If it's really important, you're going to want to talk about it. For that reason, we want to encourage people to discuss their religion, and we will give credit for religion without written work. It's the only subject of which that's true. But in 8th grade, I really urge my families to actually do the writing. Those writing assignments are very formative. They are going to develop those habits of thought that the children need in high school. So I really encourage you to, go ahead and do them. The last part of the religion course this year is A Case for Christianity by C.S. Lewis. There are study questions in designing our classical curriculum and probably in the syllabus too, to help the students see the argument made by Lewis in his writing. That is also very formative for the students. I encourage you to actually get to that point and do it, and you'll love it. You, the mom or dad, will love it. It's so, so exciting. Okay. Let's see. I also want to, mention just a few other kind of general things, then we'll look at those texts. Algebra 1/2 is usually kind of our standard recommendation. If you're doing teaching textbooks, it would be the teaching textbooks, Algebra 1. In either case, this is a good introduction to algebra skills, and algebra is a really good discipline for the analytic stage because it moves from one premise to the next through a connecting idea. In a way, it's an argument itself, right? Also, grammar continues to be really important for the 8th grade student. We're identifying those function of words in sentences by breaking down the sentences into their parts. And and that's an analytic skill, and it's an analytic skill they can really master. So it not only is a good thing in itself, but it makes it possible for them to see internally what mastery is like. And the continued study of Latin also helps develop that ability. We will have in 8th grade, the art text is Art Through Faith, and that's a major platform for discussion with the students. I encourage you to discuss those. Discussing is important, articulating your thoughts. Oral composition helps hone the thinking skills. It's something you want to have. The science text is also Concepts and Challenges, and that has a focus on applied principles for the reasons I was just giving. The student is often asked to use material from previous lessons in solving problems in the current lesson. That's important, and you don't always see that in the other alternatives people use for science. We continue to expose children to classical music. so that it enhances their acquaintance with the beautiful. I do want to mention again that, we're doing Shakespeare in the poetry. And the fact is that the poetry in 8th grade is in some ways easier than in the 7th. At least I've just found that the kids have an easier time with it. But it's still Shakespeare and it's still somewhat difficult. And I, just to ask you to remember that it's important to have 3 levels of material for students. Easy for fluency, comfort level so they can concentrate on the content and the methodology, but some that's challenging, some that pushes them. The challenge pieces just broaden your horizons and give you a clearer perception of reality. So, yeah. And, in 8th grade, we specifically asked students to analyze some of the sonnets, which is an exercise really well suited to the stage of formation. And keeping that focus on analysis in history in 8th grade, our text and supplemental reading concentrates on people and events from the Middle Ages. The chapter questions from the text, again, or still, need to have the cited page number where the answer is found so that the student has practice in locating material in a text, which leads to attentive reading. And then every answer in questions that make you think or questions that test your character should be, especially in 8th grade, a developed paragraph. You'll notice I don't ask them to do all of them, like there are often 10. I say pick 5. It's because I'd rather have them do fewer and do them well than do all of them and do them minimally. And I also want to point out that the writing assignments in the history course are chosen specifically to give the children an opportunity to practice the skills that they will be asked to use in high school. So there is one of virtually every kind of writing assignment that they will be asked to do in high school. There's a compare-contrast, there's a point of view, there's a summary, there's extrapolation of information. When I was putting those assignments together, I went through the high school program and thought about what kinds of skills they were going to need to have. And then I inserted those skills into the assignments in the 8th grade history and religion. So they're very important for writing preparation for the high school program. Okay, so let's look at those texts. I really like the Faith and Life book, Our Life in the Church. A friend of mine, Martha Long, wrote that after she had been teaching at St. Dorothy's in Glendora, California. And I just thought she did a beautiful job of reviewing the sacramental life of the church and following a reasonable order and the level of the presentation. We have the students read the text and then go over the same material in the Baltimore Catechism. The Baltimore Catechism is more formal and succinct, more precise, as I was saying earlier. But the Faith and Life text fleshes out the doctrine. These two work together really well. And then I was telling you, there are those very important writing assignments, and then there's the Case for Christianity, which is just so much fun. Okay, I mentioned the Saxon Algebra 1/2. With Voyages in English 8, you'll see that, like I was saying, it's that cyclical approach to the grammar. And if kids have done Voyages 6 and Voyages 7, particularly if they've done that, then I'd recommend doing Easy Grammar Plus, which, while it's true, is not as doctrinally rich. It is nicely set up for independent work, and I like to see that as we're heading into high school. Yeah. If they haven't been using the Voyages up to this point, and it's possible for you as a parent, teacher, to be involved, then I'd recommend doing that. But if you can't, Easy Grammar Plus will be fine. Again, I talked about Wordly Wise before. I think it's an excellent series. It actually seems to encourage the student to appropriate the words, not just learn them, but make them his own. We talked about the fundamentals course, so you've already heard that. The Father Henley Latin 1 is what we recommend after the fundamentals course. So if the student did fundamentals 2 in 7th grade, then Latin Father Henley's Latin 1 would be the place to go. If he has not done the Fundamentals 2, then I'd recommend doing the Fundamentals 2. Now, if he's coming into 8th grade and has never done any of our Latin, then I wouldn't start with Fundamentals 2. So in that case, I would recommend talking to a consultant or calling the office to talk about, where's the place to start. You can start with Father Henley, as a matter of fact, because he starts at the beginning. But it's a lot easier if you've done something else first. So I'd probably start with Fundamentals 1 and then go into the Father Henley in high school. But anyway, that's a prudential consideration. Okay, and in art, I already talked about that. So concepts and challenges, same things I said last time. Music we've talked about, poetry we talked about, and history we talked about. Good, so now we can look at 9th grade. Okay, the 9th grade student is, still in this logical or analytical stage, and he is really ready, in my experience, to understand and present an argument or position on, various matters. In writing, so, the foundation's being laid for arguments the student will pursue for the rest of high school, some of which we've already talked about, and which I will talk about in more detail, both here and in the rhetorical stage module. In writing in 9th grade, the focus is the ability to relate key events within a whole that includes events, plot, and characterizations, and has a clear beginning, middle, and end. And additionally, the student needs to work on his vocabulary skills. He should be able to use a wide variety of words correctly. And remember what I said about the prepositions. Pay attention to that. Whatever the source or subject of his writing assignments, one should be willing to work diligently at rewriting and perfecting all the writing skills we focused on in previous years. I just always start out the year saying to my students, I did it with my children, I do it with my students now, my grandchildren, say, don't think that you have somehow failed if I ask you to redo something. I redo all my writing. The first time you're kind of getting the thoughts out there, but then you're going to hone it by going over it. You're going to ask the students those same questions that I mentioned before, Does what you say actually follow from your opening statement? So have you clearly set the expectations for your paragraph, essay, paper? Are you actually answering the question that's presented? I like it when the students put the question at the top of the, at the top of the paper so that it's right there in front of the student. He knows what the assignment actually is. If he's retelling a story, is the chronological order really clear, and also has he picked the most important things? And if it's the order of importance, which almost always it is these days, that is in 9th grade, is that a reasonable, is his order a reasonable order? Does every paragraph have one central idea, and are there good transitions from one idea to another? We're working on all of those writing skills. Okay, our content goal for religion in 9th grade is to deepen the student's understanding of the truths of the faith that he's learned in grade school. As we've been saying, learning is cyclical. You learn something and come back to it later at a deeper level. And that's what we're doing this year. The writing assignments in religion use the outlines provided by the text. And again, I'm so glad you're listening to this if you have a 9th grader, because it's really important that the student follow these outlines. When you're grading those essays, the first element of the grade should come from the student's correct use of the outline. When I get a student, if I'm working with somebody and I look through and I see that he hasn't followed the outline, I just send it back. And I say, that outline was provided for you. I want you to use it. You're learning from a model. It's important that you are able to follow that order. That's the right order. And by following that right order in your presentation, you are going to be exercising your mind in a way that's very formative. You're going to learn how to order your papers. You do this now, it'll be so much easier later to do it on your own. Because you're not just seeing the order, but you're actively using the order provided. It's really a powerful learning tool, both for writing and for constructing cohesive intellectual arguments. The student is learning argumentation from a master teacher. Okay, the Earth Science course is one of my favorites. So I just want to mention that it has 4 levels of its own. Now, some of our students do Earth Science in 8th grade. That's possible. It's, I'd say the majority of students do it in 9th grade. This course teaches students about Earth Science, and it does that effectively because it uses various learning modes. So the student reads, he writes, he draws, and his reading is very active because he has to locate the correct sources and the correct places in those sources. So that's the first level, right? Learning Earth Science. But because of the way that he has to find the information, that active reading, that's another level of the course. The student is learning research skills, something that is going to be very important in all future courses. He learns how to find what he needs in a text, not just turn a page. Third, he's learning how to write. There are 2 essays to write each week at the beginning of the year. And though this may seem overwhelming there at the beginning, by the end of the year, it's really easy for the students to do. So that first module, the geology, there really are 2 essays a week. In some of the later modules, so we also do oceanography, meteorology, and astronomy. There are some activities in place of some of those writing assignments, but there's a lot of writing throughout the year. And this means that the students really learn how to write. By the end of the year, it's easy, honestly, for them. And it makes all other writing assignments in high school much easier. I've had any number of students say to me, Mrs. Berquist, that was really hard at the beginning of the Earth Science course, but I'm so glad I did it, and now writing is not hard for me. The 4th level, though, that is accomplished in this course is the most important. There's a very real way in which this course is a course in logic. The information on the worksheets is all related information, but it's not ordered. In order to write an essay, the student has to order the information. He has to see the relationships between the various pieces of information, see what is subordinate to what, and put together what goes together. This is an exercise in logic and in order. Okay, the U.S. history course, I would like to talk about a bit next, is setting the context for the next 3 years' historical conversation. The content object is to learn about the beginning of our country, the issues that moved us into revolution, and the way those issues and others have affected the course of our history as a nation. The student reads about colonization, the revolution, westward expansion, the Civil War, the period of recovery, World War I, and World War II. He explores both sides of the controversies surrounding the revolution, the Civil War, and World War II. So he's learning how to exercise judgment about those issues. There are many literature works read in conjunction with the text in history. The number of books read in history for 9th grade is 15. There are also supplementary readings supplied in the syllabus. It is very important that the student have help in planning his course of reading. Time management often becomes an issue, so the right selection of books can help with that. Your consultant will be able to help you choose the best books for your student. I do want to mention that I love the Leonard Wibberley books, which are really pretty easy reading, but they're very, they're a lot of fun. They're easy to enter into, very accessible. The language is not hard, but they do speak to the real issues. So I always have my students read the Leonard Wibberley books, among other books that they will be reading. Now, all of that has to do with the content of the history, and it's setting a context for the next 3 years' historical conversation. We're beginning to think about, where does the authority for government come from? Who's exercising it? What are the conditions? You know, you can't have a revolution that is moral if there aren't certain factors at play. We want to begin to discuss that. In discussing that, thinking about where authority comes from. How do you determine that this is a rightful authority or not? It's not just because I feel like it, right? But you want to, yeah. So it's the beginning of that conversation, and that's present in the ninth grade history. There's also a writing sequence built into the ninth grade history, which is intended to teach ninth grade students how to write a paper exploring a controversial issue, presenting both sides clearly, and then making a judgment about the truth of the matter. This helps them learn how to make judgments and how to present a persuasive paper. I always tell my students, you will never persuade anybody of anything unless you can demonstrate that you understand both sides of the position. Why should they listen to you if you don't even know what their position is? So we're working on developing that ability. The process is gradual. The first paper is written in the first person so that the student learns how to speak from someone else's perspective. The second paper is a conversation between persons holding opposing views so that the student learns how to present two opposing points of view persuasively. The third paper is a straight narrative so that the student practices writing objectively in the third person. And then the fourth paper puts all those skills together when the children are examining the Civil War and making a determination of who's in the right. So that paper presents two opposing views, each written as cogently as possible, as persuasively as possible, and then the student makes a determination about the justice of the positions. He writes in the objective voice, but he presents each point of view as persuasively as possible. Okay, those are very important aspects of ninth grade. It's also, in ninth grade, usually the children are doing Algebra 1. Sometimes they're doing Algebra 2. If they did Algebra 1 in 8th grade, they often do Algebra 2 in 9th grade and Geometry in 10th grade. If they have not yet done Algebra, they do Algebra 1 in 9th grade, Geometry in 10th grade, and Algebra 2 in 11th grade. Algebra is just a good discipline for, the analytic stage because of that kind of argument that is built into the text. You're moving from one premise to the next through a connecting idea. We are studying English grammar for the last time formally in 9th grade, so, still analyzing. And we're also, the end of the course has composition techniques, which fits well with that emphasis in history on the writing sequence, and in religion on the writing. So there's a lot of emphasis in 9th grade on improving writing. Latin continues to be important for all the same reasons as in the previous years. It's a discipline for the mind. It expands the vocabulary. It increases the students' understanding of English. And eventually it will enable students to read church documents in the original language. And then it also radically improves test scores. Yeah, it's amazing what an effect Latin has on those standardized test scores. Students who do Latin as opposed to no language score anywhere from 50 to 150 points higher on the SAT score, significantly higher. But it's also true that of all the other languages other than Greek that someone might do, children doing Latin score the highest of all the children reporting doing another language. So just another plug for Latin here. And I do want to mention this too. I've just found that the 9th grade student often needs help with time management. I just want to warn you about that. So I found with my 9th graders that it behooved me to meet with them on Monday morning before I started working with my younger kids, just to go over what was expected for the week, highlight, you're going to be working on this paper, and then meet with them again at least on Thursday to go over what was accomplished. Because I just find that the 9th grade student, for reasons I'm not perfectly sure about, but even the kid who in 8th grade was, managing his time pretty well, seems to have more difficulty in 9th grade. I just want to prepare you for that. Okay, so we talked about religion, math, English. The Warner's Grammar and Composition is the text I used with all of my kids. And it was widely available, though out of print, even then, because so many people had used it. It was a standard text in many, 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 many schools. So you could always get a used copy. That seems to have stopped. So Whole Traditions is what's currently available. It's very much the same as the Warner's Grammar. It doesn't have the composition portion, so we have our own composition text, which you can get if you're using Whole Traditions. And then, especially in the Learning Support class, because that's what we use. Okay, by this point, usually our kids are using Father Henley. They're either using Father Henley Latin 1, and we divide that into two parts. This is a little confusing, but I'll say it here, and you can always ask your consultant about it. Father Henley's Latin 1 book is used for our Latin 1 course and our Latin 2 course. The Latin 1 course covers Units 1 through 7. The Latin 2 course covers Units 8 through 14. And then his Latin 2 book is our Latin 3 course. There you go. Okay, let's look at the next one, Sue. I talked about the earth science. I talked about the history. There's a lot of literature. I already talked about that. So I think that might be it. So that's good. That goes through all of the 6th through 9th grade courses. Now, I also like to just mention this. When something doesn't work immediately, I like to slow down the impulse to just dump something and pick up something else, because I've often found that the problem isn't actually in the material. So this is what I counsel people when they say, oh, Laura, this just isn't working. I need something else. I say, well, let's first look at the environment. By that I mean, partly where the student is working, when he is working, what's going on around him. But I also mean things like, is he getting enough sleep? Could that be a problem? Are there other issues in the household with 9th grade students? There are often, to be honest, hormonal issues, right? It's not the material. It's the child is working out other problems, and you really need to address those. I suggested to one of my moms that she take her son out for lunch and that they have a little conversation about how hormones affect impulsivity and irascibility. And so she did. She had that conversation. And at the end of it, this kid leaned across the table and took her hand and said, oh, thank you so much, Mom. I thought I needed management for anger counseling. So, I think sometimes, and then things were much better after that, because, he felt more comfortable. He was worried. And now he was able to kind of understand what was going on and move past it. So those kinds of things can really affect the schoolwork. Think about that before you just, jettison this material. Also, I recommend, being aware of the formation goals really helps, because if you're aware of what you're trying to achieve, then you can break the goals down into smaller tasks. So my example of the St. Luke in 6th grade, often the kids just aren't quite ready to do a real summary where they say, in this chapter, Jesus heals. He heals physically and he heals spiritually. He heals physically when he cures the woman who has the hemorrhage. He heals spiritually when he gives the man faith. They're just not ready to see that kind of thematic presentation. Well, that's okay. You understand that the first thing there is to think about what's important. So instead of having them write that kind of full-blown summary, you just say, tell me about the most important thing in the chapter. So you've broken the formation goal down into smaller tasks. I think that can really help. And then you don't have to stop using the Gospels. You can just change the approach to something that's more doable for the student, but still achieves the formation goal. Sometimes you choose to use the same material, but achieve the formation goal in another subject. So, like an example of that would probably be the 8th grade religion. Maybe you decide that for, prudential reasons, you're not going to do the writing. Okay, so you're not going to achieve the formation goals that the writing would give you then in the 8th grade religion, but you're still going to keep the same material because there's a benefit to the material even without that additional formation goal, and you'll work on those writing skills in other subjects. So maybe you'll give more emphasis to the writing in this history, for example. So I recommend trying those things before you decide to change your text. But, sometimes we get to that, right? Like, this is just not working. I need something else. And that's fine. You can do that. But in that case, think about the formation goals that were being achieved by the text you were using and try to make sure that you're achieving those in some other way. Okay? So there we go. That's an overview of the program and a discussion of the 6th through 9th grade texts. God bless you and thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was wonderful.